Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Charlie Dixon, and today we're excited to welcome Dr. Katelyn Lehman back to our show. Katelyn is a pioneering practitioner and the founder of Quantum Clinic, a Los Angeles-based wellness center dedicated to heart-brain coherence and nervous system healing through sympathetic resonance. Her innovative approach to mental health has been featured in Goop, the LA Times, NBC, and Beverly Hills Times, where she's been recognized for building a movement of radical reconnection with nature, our bodies, intuition, and one another. By blending science and spirituality, she's reshaping the landscape of mental wellness, offering transformative healing experiences. I'm excited to welcome Katelyn back to our Clinician series, where we take listeners behind the therapy door to explore the strategies and approaches that truly support mental health. In this episode, we dive into the creation of Quantum Clinic's integrative somatic model, blending heart-brain coherence biofeedback, float therapy, and expressive arts to address trauma, chronic stress, pain, and mood disorders. We unpack the science and clinical safeguards behind the work, explore applications, including psychedelic integration, and discuss how other clinicians can thoughtfully integrate body-based approaches into their own practice. Katelyn, welcome back to the show. It's so great to have you back.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Lehman, let's kind of go backwards a little bit. I want to make sure that everyone's up to speed. I know that you hold a PhD in clinical psychology with a focus on multicultural and community psychology, and you worked across settings from community mental health to forensic psychology. Can you remind us what led you to move beyond traditional talk therapy and create Quantum Clinic? And then what were you really noticing in your clinical work that signaled a need for more somatic body-based approaches?
Yeah, that's absolutely a great question. So I would just say, my early training gave me a really deep respect for talk therapy, especially more relational, multicultural, and community-based approaches. But over time, I realized both in my own process of healing as well as in my clinical work, a consistent ceiling effect, right? So a lot of clients were able to understand their patterns clearly or cognitively. They could maybe narrate their trauma story, and they were, in many cases, pretty insightful. And yet, at the level of the nervous system, they remained stuck in those patterns and stuck in, threat physiology. So, as I worked my way through the different systems in community mental health and forensic settings, and then later in private practice, I saw the same pattern, which is chronic hyperarousal, low-level dissociation, inflammation, often pain and sleep disruption that just were really difficult to resolve through insight or cognitive and behavioral approaches alone. And, they could know intellectually that they were safe, but they didn't feel it in their body. And so their bodies then were still kind of bracing for that next disruption. And then especially when in my work with very sensitive people and trauma survivors or folks who are dealing with complex intergenerational stress patterns, they're often pathologized for the nervous system adaptations that were part of their survival mechanisms. And so that really conflicted for me, and the realization that pushed me towards, this approach was a recognition that we needed to work with physiology rather than try and override it through cognitive approaches. And so Quantum Clinic emerged from that kind of dialectic tension between honoring, the power of meaning making and narrative work, while also recognizing that deep and lasting healing has to come from within the body at the level of the autonomic nervous system, the heart, and the body's rhythmic regulation. So it was kind of like a way to create a model that moved beyond the approaches that were available to me at the time.
Nice, nice. And you mentioned this feeling of feeling stuck. Truth moment, I've been there myself in therapy where you feel like you know what's happening, but you get stuck in that in it while it's happening. And it's hard to get yourself out of it once you're in the middle of it. You can say it, you know it's happening, but it's still really difficult to move past it and move forward through it.
Same, girl.
Yeah, yeah, it
Same.
happens to the best of us. So I know that that led you to develop this more integrative model, which is why it's kind of fascinating to me because I've been there. That blends that heart brain coherence, the flotation rest, and expressive arts integration as well. Can you walk us through the clinical logic behind this framework and how do these three elements work better together than any of those things by themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. So each of the three pillars addresses an interlocking but, a separate but related part of the healing process. So
Mhm.
heart brain coherence really establishes the basis for physiological safety. It gives clients a direct, measurable way to regulate their autonomic state and experience agency in shifting that internal environment, right? So that's kind of the first pillar. The second pillar is flotation rest, which again is sort of an opportunity for practice effect to take place. It then amplifies the regulation that is experienced through the entrainment in heart brain coherence by removing external or excessive sensory input. And in the float, the nervous system is given time and space to reorganize with far less interference from the environment. So it's not effortful, it's regulation through environmental support. So it creates the conditions for that learning to take place at a deeper level. And then finally, the third pillar would be expressive arts integration. And again, you know, the client experience is guided by a clinician throughout. So there is opportunity for verbal expression of anxiety, fear, whatever's coming up, we're there to support verbally. But at its core, it's designed for people to, you know, translate these nonverbal intuitive or sensory awarenesses into embodied insights with
Mhm.
symbolism through form. It supports memory consolidation and it actually helps with narrative coherence or telling a story that makes sense
Okay.
over time as well. So while each thing can in and of itself be helpful individually, together it forms this really elegant feedback system where coherence kind of prepares the nervous system, floating deepens and stabilizes that state change and the learning that occurs there. And then the expressive arts helps to integrate and anchor it, giving people, more integration into their experience. And that's where we
Gotcha.
see real powerful change.
Nice, nice. And I know we did speak kind of in depth in our last conversation about biofeedback. And so I know that each session begins with heart rate of variability and biofeedback. What does that protocol actually look like in practice? What does that feel like for clients as they're coming in? I know that there's guided meditation. So what does that look like? And how do you coach the clients through those patterns into the coherence? How do we get to that point?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, each session begins with a real time HRV biofeedback meditation. So, there are these little sensors that clip onto the earlobe and are attached to it's Bluetooth to an app that is created by one of our research partners, the HeartMath Institute. And folks who are interested to learn more about coherence and to explore the technologies that are available can check out HeartMath Institute as well as Quantum Clinic's website. But so basically we're just tracking HRV and the app then is calculating a coherence score over the duration of the time that we're seated together going through this meditation. So the meditation is really intentional and it's kind of simple for advanced meditators. It might just be pretty simple present moment awareness. We go through slowing the breath, entering into a deep rhythmic breathing pattern, about 4 to 5 seconds in, 4 to 5 seconds out. We do a little bit of a body scan and progressive muscle relaxation, just kind of bringing the client into the here and now, connecting with the body. And then we shift our attention to the heart. So actively and intentionally cultivating those affective states like joy, reverence, gratitude, deep appreciation that are in the research shown to elevate coherence scores. And so it's really, that's, where a lot of the clinical skills come in, working with people of a variety of different backgrounds, different levels of meditation experience, and just meeting folks where they are. That's why we really consider this kind of person-centered in its approach. And that goes on for about, 10 minutes of seated meditation. And often we witness and experience a shift over that time. So we're coaching, and the clinician is looking at the app throughout the meditation, and they're also connected to a sensor. So there's a clinician coherence score and a client coherence score and a group score. So we're watching, and you can kind of use your language to support people breathing deeper into their belly, to kind of modulate the experience based on the data we're seeing on our screens. But we are tracking respiration, coherence ratio, and HRV amplitude and smoothness over the duration of the time. So these are signs of whether or not somebody's in a sympathetic dominant state, or they're able to, be connected and embodied.
Nice. Okay. Okay. And I have a question about the meditations themselves. So I've done a few guided meditations, things that you find like, on
Yeah.
Google or whatever, you playing behind the music. Done it is more of a relaxation type of thing with different age groups, mainly children or students, colleges that I've worked in. And it was mainly used then again for relaxation. How are those guided meditations different than the ones that you use for the HRV, their biofeedback?
Well, I mean, that's a big question. There's lots of different types of meditations. And again, you know, ultimately we are talking about shifting affective and physiological state into one that is more parasympathetic dominant, right? So relaxation. That is what we're doing. We're supporting people in having a felt sense of safety and deeper relaxation. Now, coherence itself, and I think we talked a little bit about this in our last one, coherence itself, the word comes to us from different scientific disciplines, and it refers to, without getting too technical, you want to think of waves
Mhm.
in the ocean. If the waves are, at different tempos or paces, right? And the correlation between those waves is disparate, or there's a lot of variability in the different tempos of the wave, that's incoherence. And coherence arises through the synchronization of those waves, and it can also be measured through like there being an equal and opposite of the wave,
Okay.
right? So this is clinically meaningful data because it tells us about somebody's capacity to access this state, which is associated with over 5,000 health benefits, like biometric markers in the body that encode for health and human functioning. So while meditation is the practice, coherence is the effect, right?
Okay.
It's like
Okay.
there are lots of different practices or techniques that you can use to achieve a coherent state.
Mhm.
And we choose to use heart-centered, heart-focused breathing, slow and rhythmic breathing, and a body scan to help people connect to their body and the heart. But you can do all different types of meditative techniques to varying degrees. Will they allow you to achieve coherence as a physiological state? I hope that helps to clarify.
It does. It does. It clarifies a lot because I just want to make sure that, I want to highlight the clinical aspect of what you guys are doing versus what any layperson can find, online and use that way as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. So the last time I was quite intrigued to learn more about the floating, and because again, there are so many float therapy places just kind of popping up. I know they are here where I live.
Yeah.
In the southeast, it's a lot of them just coming up, and I wanted to know, what the difference is and the clinical piece of that. So, can you talk us through how someone comes to the floating piece of your sessions? Tell me about the assessments that you do beforehand. What is that experience like for clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So when a client comes to us for the first time, we do a fairly comprehensive, we'll call it biopsychosocial assessment or health behavior assessment. We're doing an assessment of strengths, needs, expectations. We ask about underlying medical and mental health history. We're assessing for social determinants of health. And then we use a structured assessment called the MHI 38, which was a measure of psychological well-being and emotional distress. So takes about 20 to 30 minutes to complete this intake before the first visit. So our clinical staff, when they review that before they work with someone for the first time, they have a pretty good sense of whether or not this person is coming in with a history of trauma, what the areas are in their life that are particularly distressing or not. And again, because we sort of see this as a model of preventative behavioral health care, we're not necessarily aiming our intervention at symptom reduction or treatment of mental illness. We're suggesting that it's sort of a trans-theoretical model of care that supports health and human functioning at that physiological level. And that has, downstream implications across diagnostic categories. So the question then was, what about the float? Well, that is what people come to us for, right? That the coherence meditation is sort of the pre-service intervention, right? And orients them, gets them connected to their body and physically in the space and service environment. Then they have 1 hour in the flotation chamber, and that experience is private, it's individual, or, we do have a couples option. So sometimes we get couples who come together to float. So what is the float experience like? So I'll tell you from my own experience. I float weekly at this point in my life. Sometimes right now I'm under a lot of stress with things going on in life. And so I'm going even more regularly as a preventative care for my own mind and body. But
Okay.
we see clients at a cadence of about once a month or twice a month. Some folks come a little bit closer to weekly. I will say it is different every single time that I go into the tank. So it really is like in Gestalt therapy, there's the concept of mirroring or an encounter with our own lived experience, right?
Mhm.
If I'm bringing a lot of stress and emotional overwhelm or anger or frustration with me into the experience, I will be met by that. If I bring fear, anxiety, I will be met by that. But if I bring presence, calm, openness, I will also be met by that. So it really is kind of a mirror, a window into the self, a window into the spirit or the soul of the person. And sometimes while you're in the tank, you may drift into what can be called a state of non-sleep deep rest. Another word for that would be like a liminal space where you're not fully asleep, but you're not also alert and awake as you would be in your normal waking state. You may experience color. It's sort of the mind when it's reduced of external stimulus in these environments, the mind quiets Sometimes it takes longer for certain people than others. Again, everybody's body is different. And so it really is a subjective experience. And as we continue on through this conversation, we can talk a little bit more about different subgroups. But I would say the overwhelming majority of people experience the service as helping them to connect deeper with their own body and with their own heart and mind. And they find it to be relaxing and restorative afterwards.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Most of us spend more time at work than anywhere else doing anything else. So why not spend that time in a job you love? Introducing Triad's Jobs Marketplace, the only job site dedicated specifically to behavioral and mental health professionals. Featuring more than 1,000 open jobs from dozens of behavioral and mental health employers, and searchable by location, professional field, employment type, specialization, and more. Jobs Marketplace helps you find your next career opportunity. Full-time, part-time, or gig time, make the most of your time. To access Jobs Marketplace, register for your free professional account at hellotriad.com/BHT. That's hellotriad.com/BHT, and then click to Jobs Marketplace. If you're already a member of the Triad community, visit app.hellotriad.com/jobs. That's app.hellotriad.com/jobs. Visit us today and take your next career step tomorrow.
Very nice, very nice. And you mentioned mirroring. So, a question for that. I know that you mentioned that you work a lot with trauma survivors. How do you prepare them for that mirroring effect, or even a revisit in their mind of a
Sure.
traumatic time?
Yeah. So with this, like with any trauma-informed intervention, preparation is everything, right?
Yeah.
So we normalize for folks in anticipation of even their first service that it can activate things that may be inside of them. It's not meant to create distress, but it removes distraction. And so for trauma survivors, we really emphasize agency, choice, and pacing, right? So if they need to adapt the environment by leaving a door open, different choices like having a light on or off, or adjusting the volume of the frequencies that are played in the tank, maybe doing a shorter session, or, really, if people are transparent about what they're going through, then obviously we use the pre-float meditation as an opportunity to get them really connected and grounded in their body. And then of course, explicit naming at a number of different times throughout the journey. You can exit the tank whenever you want to. You don't have to stay in there if you're freaking out and you're feeling emotionally overwhelmed and you want to leave. You can get out. There's nothing wrong with that. And then obviously being present for and witnessing and working with folks who may be having trauma responses afterwards as well. Though I will admit that's much less common than one might think. We've had, I think, in 3 years of operation, one person whose trauma response and dissociative response was so severe that it was determined even before she went back to the tank that it was contraindicated. We've worked with, people who were directly affected by the Eaton fires here in Los Angeles about a year ago. We've worked with survivors of trauma through a partnership with the Program for Torture Victims here in Los Angeles. And the vast majority of those folks, even though they've been through incredible amounts of adversity, perceive and experience the totality of the service as supportive, and it allows their body to really rest, right? But that safety and agency and choice is framed from the beginning. One other thing that I would say about that is we really talk about emotions not as threats, but as information, right? This is meant to be a healing encounter. And so the goal is not necessarily freedom from any and all emotional experience, but that catharsis can be titrated through exposure within a regulated state. So the nervous system, if the nervous system stays within its window of tolerance, the experience can be stabilizing rather than overwhelming, but that's very subjective. So that's where the kind of clinical judgment comes in when we're working with
Yeah.
people based on their readiness, based on, even just how they talk about it as they're getting the tour, things like that.
Gotcha. Okay. Because that you answered one of the questions that I had. Is it really for anyone? I guess maybe want to dig deeper into that. Is floating for all people who have experienced any type of trauma, PTSD, any of anything? Is it for everyone? And then is there some mechanism built in so that people can say, you know what, I need to go. Being able to
Yeah.
leave is empowering.
Definitely. It's stated at a number of times by our clinicians and then repeated in the auditory script that comes on when you first are in the tank. Remember, you can always exit at any time you want for any reason. No reason to stay in. Yeah, in terms of contraindications, like clinical or subclinical groups that we think don't it's not the best for, though that would involve active psychosis or untreated bipolar mania, severe dissociative disorders without any kind of stabilizing, treatment that goes along with it. We deal with a lot of people in our practices in general and in the world right now who have passive suicidal ideation, and
Yeah.
a lot of our work is around normalizing that. We do assess for suicidality in our intake, but active and acute suicidality is contraindicated. And then uncontrolled epilepsy or open wounds. So certain medical conditions are contraindicated. Interestingly enough, the one question that I get most from lay people is, what if I'm claustrophobic, right?
Mhm.
And so if you know the research on the treatment of claustrophobia, it's exposure with response prevention. So that's ironically exactly what we're doing. Somebody with very severe claustrophobia, they're not going to have the optimal experience in this because it's just, but I have worked with one woman who comes to mind who I would say had moderate claustrophobia and was very activated by the whole experience, but she did end up going into the tank. We were able to modify it, including leaving multiple doors open, so she felt like she had an exit plan, and she stayed in for about 30 minutes and left saying that she felt really proud of herself for having done that. So, but the motivation to confront that is, I think,
Mhm.
ultimately really lies with the client, and we're not forcing this on anyone. It's a voluntary service. So, claustrophobia is one of those that kind of splits the line.
Got you, got you. And going with another layman's type of question, do
Yes.
you need to enjoy floating? Do you need to know how to swim? Like, is there any level
Great question.
of experience there that needs to happen?
So a lot of people, especially from different cultures, feel like, I don't know how to swim, and I'm not really comfortable in water, so on and so forth. The beautiful thing about flotation therapy in particular is that the water contains about 1,500 pounds of Epsom salts. So you actually cannot sink at all. Like it's chemically and physically impossible to sink in the water. So if somebody is curious, float curious, but they don't know how to swim or they're a little anxious around, am I going to float? The answer is you will float effortlessly. It's not like you have to hold your breath like you're in a
Okay.
swimming pool and you're trying to keep yourself up. You sit down in the water first and then you lay down. And again, it's only about a foot of water. It's not very deep.
Okay.
And your body will float to the top like automatically. So if somebody is float curious and they're wanting to try it, but that's the hang up, we're definitely clear that you don't have to know how to swim. You don't have to know how to hold, support yourself in water. The water does the work for you.
Very nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I know that there is research around flotation therapy and how it can reduce stress and anxiety, really making it one of the top tier interventions for, for those types of mental health concerns. Can we talk about what happens to the nervous system as our
Yeah.
bodies are submerged in water, particularly if there is a difference when it is water that is, like you mentioned, has a lot of Epsom salts in it? Like, is there a difference? And what is our nervous system doing during that time?
Well, I think our bodies are like 60% water.
Hmm.
And I think depending on how you're measuring that, even by molecule, it's even more like 80% water by molecule. I don't know, maybe 60% by weight and 80% by I don't know how they do that, how they calculate all of that. But like it's sort of like returning to an environment that is, womb-like in a
Mm.
sense. So, and water, interestingly, I think, there's lots of research coming out on what actually is water. We don't really fully know, um, what is water. It has memory. It can communicate with us in interesting ways. And so, water, even spiritually and religiously, in many cultures and traditions, is considered holy, right? We're baptized in
Mhm.
water in the Christian traditions. There's, many, many mystical and spiritual associations with water and healing
Yeah.
water. And so, that I'll just start with that. And then kind of getting a little bit more into your question about the neurophysiology of this, of what happens when we're floating in the water. During flotation rest, sensory input is drops dramatically, right? So it reduces what's called cortical load and downshifts the sympathetic activation of the whole nervous system, allowing for parasympathetic dominance to emerge. So neurophysiologically, we see reduced cortisol, increased alpha and theta brainwave activity, enhanced interoceptive awareness. So that's an awareness of the internal bodily sensory processes, like the development of that, and improved autonomic balance. So, unlike many relaxation techniques, flotation therapy doesn't rely exclusively on concentration or effort, right?
Mm.
So, it creates a context whereby regulation happens organically. And that's especially important for people whose nervous systems are exhausted and chronically vigilant, right?
Yeah.
So it's the environment that creates the conditions for deep rest, as opposed to intention or effort or concentration required to settle things down, right?
Right. Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You got me really wanting to try this, Kayla.
Yeah, you got to try it.
Yeah, at first I was like, "Oh, I don't know about this," but you really got me, especially the more deeper our conversations are about it. Like, this is something that is quite intriguing to me. Thank you.
Oh, I'm grateful
Okay.
to hear that.
Yes. So the frequency that people hear, is that something that is set for each client? Is it something that is a standard frequency or message that is played? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So we use a standardized protocol that is really centered around stress reduction, relaxation, waking up of the different energetic centers in the body, and then these universally recognized tones like solfeggio frequencies, et cetera. People can find frequency protocols online through YouTube, through internet searches like binaural beats. But throughout time, sound has been used for medicinal and healing properties, right? And sound healing with the crystal bowls and
Yep.
everything is really popular these days. So this is an adaptation of that. At Quantum Clinic, you receive approximately 30 frequencies, and again, it takes you through it. Kind of, I describe it with my hands because it's energetically, it's about bringing you in and bringing you, into the body and relaxing and bringing you down, then waking things up and then playing sounds that are kind of universally recognized to be supportive of processing emotion, liberation from fear and guilt, those kind of more esoteric spiritual tones. But again, one of the things that's really important in this model is agency and choice. So you can choose to leave it on at full volume. You can turn it off. You can have it playing low and quiet in the background. It's really up to the client what feels right for them.
Nice. Okay. Okay. And you mentioned earlier that some patients come close to once a week, some come monthly.
Yeah.
You yourself go often as well. What does a treatment plan look like for clients? Is it what determines the session frequencies, the duration, maybe even reassessments that are done? What determines those things for
Mhm.
each client?
Yeah. So these are all really great questions, and some of it we're still kind of figuring it out as we
Yeah.
grow through this,
Mhm.
especially as we're working this year to roll out our first contracts with private insurers, and I'm also in relationship and talks with Medicare. We see this truly as a preventative care orientation. So just like your annual physical, you would want to go once a year. We see this, it'll depend on reimbursement. It'll depend on
Understood. Yeah.
medical necessity, and when we
Yeah.
are working through those issues. But we see our standard offer as once a month for 3 months to see then how you're feeling and how you're doing.
Okay.
We are doing a brief reassessment at each visit with what's called an MHI-5. It's the abridged version of the 38 questions that we ask at the first intake. So there is tracking across time. And again, we are getting a quantitative HRV coherence score for each appointment as well. So we're
Okay.
seeing whether or not there's measurable improvement over time, or if it, all of those things are important aspects of the totality of what we're doing at Quantum Clinic. But a standard treatment would be 3
Okay.
once a month for 3 months to just sort of see how then, and then see how you're doing. But we have people who do come much more regularly than that. And at present, we're private pay.
Yeah.
So those questions will be determined, I think, as we continue to figure out, can the systems get behind this?
Right, right. That's, I'm sure, a long road trying to get those, especially government funded ones, to get behind more things that
You know,
are
you'd be
holistically based.
You'd be surprised. This
Hmm.
administration is actually very motivated, at least in their policy and policy positions on this, that
Okay.
prevention from a behavioral health standpoint is really a priority for them. So, again, there's
Nice.
there's often a difference between what's said and what's implemented in practice, but
Mhm.
we're trying to bridge that gap, and
Yeah.
I've found a lot of real allies within the system who are doing their best to help us navigate a complex medical ecosystem.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, good luck with all of that too.
Thank you.
Yes. So we've talked about what you do first, your assessments. We've discussed the float in depth. And so after that float, clients move into the expressive arts integration
Yeah.
part of of their sessions. What is the clinical purpose of this particular pillar, and how do you structure that time? What types of techniques can clients do? Tell us more about that.
Sure. So the expressive arts phase really is about moving the experience from state to trait, right? It's about integration of the learning that occurs while they're in the visit. We keep it pretty open-ended and non-interpretive. So we have body map and prompts that are associated with that. So using color, shape, or movement, create from the stem. I am, I see, I feel, right? Is an example of that. And we have now, I would say, probably hundreds, I mean, definitely hundreds of body maps that people have drawn depicting their energetic and qualitative experience of the float. And what we see are themes emerge over hundreds of representations of it, including lots of movement, the full spectrum of color, the rainbow, the full rainbow, right? We're all a rainbow reflecting a different color light, right? Absorbing some colors and reflecting others. And that's a really beautiful thing to see depicted and expressed and communicated through the arts. So we do body map. We have a collage station for kind of like, these inside, outside, who am I inside? What is it that I show to the world? Kind of integration. That's a fun one that people like to do. We have a clay station. So, people are able to grab a chunk of clay and just kind of mold it and see what they want to create from it. We have a lot of little clay sculptures that people have left over time. And, sometimes they do human forms, sometimes they do like a sun or a lot of nature elements come through in that. And again, there's the expressive arts, at least in the way that we practice it, comes to us from Carl Rogers' daughter, Natalie Rogers. So she really adapted her father's person-centered model to working with the expressive arts, and it's called person-centered expressive arts therapy. And so Natalie was my mother's mentor. I also worked with Natalie for a brief period of time and kind of come by it that way. But the last station that we have there is sand trays. We have a large sand tray collection, and people can. So, it's really meant to evoke a sense of play and wonder and curiosity and just connection to that kind of childlike sense of creativity and self-expression that so many of us adults don't even really allow ourselves to tap into these days, because we think we're so linear and logical. Even Sanjay Gupta, right? The famous TV personality and medical professional who he's done segments on how the arts in hospitals and other healthcare settings is tremendously supportive of health and healing. And so this is really intentional in that it's meant to support that for our clients. And, our staff is there to kind of be a supportive presence, but we're certainly not prescriptive and we don't make interpretation. It's a lot of just asking. So does this mean something to you? What came up? And then helping people to come to words to describe.
Nice. Nice. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I know practitioners are going to want to know more about these techniques and bringing somatic and body-based approaches into their own work. What existing clinical skills translate well, and what new competencies are important to develop? What kind of trainings would you recommend? How can clinicians bring this type of work into what they already do?
That's a really great question. I mean, when I look at this from kind of the lens of the humanistic and existential traditions, which really are near and dear to my heart, ultimately the recommendation is to do this stuff yourself, right? If you want to bring somatic, breath-based work into your practice, you have to cultivate that skill for yourself. So, flotation therapy in particular is tricky because there is a significant amount of investment involved in the facilities to support this type of intervention. But to your point, there are many facilities that offer a similar type service that's maybe not guided by licensed clinical staff or, doesn't involve the biofeedback meditation or expressive arts, but you can have the experience yourself. You can go to any of these places and discover for yourself, what the connection to your own body is like. You asked about, what clinical skills are important to bring to this. I think it's our flexibility and our present moment relational capacity, right? In the model where we're working, you have to develop rapport and orient someone to the physical space, guide a meditation, and then, hopefully enough of that is established that then, that they'll then want to come back again, right? Because it is
Yeah.
also sort of a standalone experience. And I would say 80% of our clients come once and we then likely don't hear from them again, which is fine because again, it's preventative. And so we appreciate that the treatment can be standalone, right? And that might be enough for someone. It's those kind of unconditional positive regard, empathy, loving awareness, those qualities that are characteristic of more of the humanistic and existential traditions that we find are most applicable to the work.
Got you. Okay. So as we come to a close, Katelyn, for clinicians who feel inspired by this model, whether they want to refer clients to Quantum Clinic or to integrate some of these principles into their own practices, where can they connect with you? What types of trainings, consultations, or resources do you offer? Tell us more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. You can connect with us through quantumclinic.com. That's our primary website. If anybody wants to reach out to me directly, my email is Katelyn@quantumclinic.com. You can also find me on social media at Dr. Katelyn Lehman. And I'm happy to consult and to provide trainings to interested parties or anybody who wants to learn more about this. I'd be honored.
Awesome. Well, Katelyn, it has been a pleasure to speak with you again today. Thank you so much.
You too, Shirley. Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners for taking the time to join us. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media at Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and even on YouTube at Behavioral Health Today. And if you like our show, make sure to give us 5 stars and leave us a review. That helps our show get discovered and share the valuable insights in each episode. As always, the resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.